Hi, Eli.
Welcome, everyone, to another wonderful day and another beautiful podcast with another wonderful lady. Actually, I'm quite curious with this one because I saw her actually put out a video there, and I thought, oh God, she's got plenty of energy. And what she was saying was got my curiosity. So you know what I'm like, listeners. I don't like to know too much. I just like to have that conversation. So I haven't really looked into her background, even though I could have, but she's very interesting, trust me. So, Marina, welcome, Marina. How are you?
Mariana.
Oh,
No,
yeah, that's it. What
it
are you?
happens all the time. Don't worry. It happens all the time.
Okay,
No
your
worries.
full name, if you give us your full name, because I'm
Okay.
bad with names.
Yes. Okay. So I am Mariana Martinez Vampiew. Vampiew is my married name, which is on my postgraduate certificate in psychological studies from the University of Glasgow. So that's part of why I've kept it because it's part of my professional credentials. Martinez is my maiden name when I was a wee maiden, and earned my undergraduate degree, bachelor's in Latin American history from Johns Hopkins
Mhm.
University. And then in my early 30s, I earned a dual master's in early childhood, general and special education from the Steinhardt School of Education at New York University. So
Wow.
yeah, so that's my name, and yeah, those are my credentials. But
Good.
again, also lived experience counts a lot, which is part of why we connected. So yeah.
Well, you see, listeners, you know she's done this before. It just rolled
No,
off of
I
her
haven't
tongue.
actually. I haven't. Like, I just started creating content like a month and a half ago, and
Really?
like I used to host my own LGBT and sing in a cabaret show, but like talking to a camera is a little bit different, So I wasn't quite sure how I would actually do the whole video thing, but I've been enjoying it mostly because it's been resonating with people in a meaningful way. If you look at our Substack and the comments, I mean, it's positive and it's impactful. It's a good
I
community
can
that we're
see, yeah, I've
building.
seen a huge amount of positive impact you've made
Yeah.
massively. So, okay, let's break it down for people to understand exactly what you do to help people in a positive way
Mhm.
in your life at the moment. So, what are you doing specifically at the moment to help people?
Okay, well, it's not overly specific, but we do have a focus, of course. Um, so I've partnered with Fahim Chukai at narcissismexposed.com, and he is a relationship coach. Now, I admittedly can be a bit wary of coaches at times
Hmm.
because you can do a 2-week online course and be a coach, or
Hmm.
you can do extensive professional development and still be a coach. So Fahim is very well trained as a coach, and we're also both fellow survivors of NPD abuse that we are open about. His
Uh-huh.
father, for example, he grew up with a narcissistic father. I'll be 47 next month, so without going into too much specifics, we don't just go into a lover or a relationship.
Uh-huh.
We go into parenting, bosses, family members, yes, relationships. Um, and yes, while our focus is NPD, we are distinctly aware that it is a bit of a trendy, overused armchair diagnosis these days. So we
Mm.
do talk about, in general, also things like toxic people relationships and attachment disorders. For example, one video that I'm working on at the moment, long form for our YouTube at Narcissism Exposed, is it NPD, attachment disorder, or are they just an a-hole? I don't know if I can curse, but I do have a bit of a potty mouth once in a while. But because sometimes you'll see, oh, I had this fantastic date, and he just ghosted me. He's a narcissist. It's like, okay, well, let's slow down a bit, right? So, but fundamentally, at the core of what we're doing is
Hmm.
that, diagnosis or not just individuals being healthy and secure in themselves and protecting themselves and healing from toxic relationships, but also trying to nurture healthier emotional dynamics within the
Uh-huh.
workplace, within families, within, of course, relationships, and with children, etc. So the work does have a focus, but I wouldn't say it's exceedingly specific because, for example, one of the things that me and Fahim have both lamented about quite a bit is that
Uh-huh.
even among the highest levels of the mental health profession, you can have a clinical psychology degree from St. Andrews,
Mhm.
which, UK, big deal, right? But even still, a lot of cluster B disorders are very poorly understood. For example, it's estimated to be thought that between 1 to 5% of the world's population has actual NPD, right? And there are various forms of it. There are, of course, the grandiose peacocks that, the average person tends to think about, but there are also the covert ones that, as we go into in our content, can be among the most dangerous because they're publicly like the nicest, most helpful people, but they hide in plain sight and are great at playing the long game. So there, a few different flavors, there's a framework, but they have their own little peculiarities, kind of like with ADHD, inattentive versus, right? So yeah.
Of course.
So that being said, fundamentally, it's just, about healing and protecting yourself, because people love to use the word red flag, right? And again, I understand that, but as fellow ADHD havers, let's give just one example. I did a recent TikTok, narcissism.exposed, on 5 signs to look at to see if somebody might be a narcissist. And again, nearly none of these are, boom, right there, right? We tell people, keep your eyes open, see if there are patterns, but fundamentally, without a diagnosis, you do have a right to walk away from any relationship that, just is harmful to you, or there's no equilibrium. So one of the things is that narcissists love to talk about themselves, like, well, I've been talking a lot so far this podcast, but as you probably know, if we're sharing stories with someone, especially if it's a painful one for them, we'll tend to share our own back, right? But we don't do it to try to one-up them. We do it because we're commiserating with them typically, right? And that's the distinction. For most people with ADHD, especially a lot of us kind of having felt a little bit like outcast sometimes in our own version of masking. So usually when we share our own stories, it's not about like, oh no, never mind what you said, my story is more important. We do it because, we want them to feel supported and commiserated with. So again, we talk about, yes, red flags, but not everything necessarily is like, oh, run, right? Keep your eyes open, watch for patterns, trust your gut, but, science matters too. And, just not any one big thing. To keep your eyes open, but also keep your heart soft and a little open too for the right people. So
let's talk about these patterns.
Yeah.
Obviously, they can manifest in more than one way. But what's the top 3 major patterns that's usually very much so?
Okay. Well, one of the tricky ones is if you do any research on NPD and cluster B disorders, is that one of the things that fascinates me is that whether they come from Alberta, Canada, Botswana, Brisbane, they kind of all seem to have like the same pattern with love bombing, idealization, then devaluation, and then discard, and usually a Hoover too. And they need their supply, their validation external, right? So the love bombing one to me is the trickiest one because especially if you're an adult survivor, and you're just coming to kind of, terms with what may have happened to you, which is, can be very painful. We don't want to think this about someone that we loved and thought loved us. You start to wonder, does this person actually like really care about me a lot? Or am I being set up for something more messed up in the future? So that can be a really difficult one for survivors to navigate, lifelong potentially. So in respect to that, I've made a few videos about how even early on in the love bombing stage, narcissists or other toxic people don't respect your boundaries, even if they're small, gentle, and reasonable. For example, you'll say something like, I'd love to, but I really need to be home by 8 o'clock tonight. Right? Quite reasonable. Or, and just watch for their reaction. An emotionally healthy person, might voice disappointment at it, because they might, of course, want to spend more time with you, but they're not going to argue against it. They're not going to make you feel guilty, things like that. So again, not as a test or a trap, but just, as part of any human relationship, sometimes you can't come through for each other as much as you really want to.
Mhm.
So just, reasonably and clearly communicating even small healthy boundaries and seeing how they react during the initial phases of any relationship. Again, work, friends, romantic, that will give you an indicator of what you're dealing with, especially again, if it becomes a pattern.
Mm.
Because
Mm.
again, as I said, love bombing is, especially when you're getting back out there again, is one of the hardest ones. I mean, you really do think, because again, romantically, if you've been in a relationship with cluster B or somebody else who's toxic, they just shower you with everything. They make you feel like, this person finally understands me and values me for who I am. And and sometimes with healthy people, that is authentic. You have your ride or
Mhm.
dies that you've known for decades, in my case. But sometimes, yeah, it is a calculated pattern of manipulation that's not just gaslighting, but what seems like intent listening from them is actually to use against you and weaponize you later when you're being devalued and then discarded. They will also
Can
do a
I
lot
just
of
stop
what's
you
called
there?
mirroring.
Let me
Oh
just
yeah,
stop
sorry,
you
go
there
ahead.
very quickly.
I know.
Because it's
I
so
tend to
easy,
go
because
on,
it's
but
so
it's
easy.
it's so much to cover. It's so much to cover. But
I
it's okay.
know,
Go
I know,
on.
I know. And it's so easy when you're at the beginning of a relationship and everything seems to be perfect and understood and etc. And everybody
Yes.
wants that, right?
Yeah.
And
I mean,
so, and
and
everybody
any
has
of us
heard
can
at
just
some
be,
point that
swept off
someone
our
had
feet by
that
that
relationship.
feeling. Yeah.
So, how can someone determine that there is something not right at the beginning? Is it just a situation is too much too
Well,
soon?
as I mentioned previously, again, keep your eyes open, watch for patterns, but also, keep your heart soft and open a little bit. So, as mentioned earlier, the best probably way to get a beat on it is again just normal, reasonable, healthy boundaries communicated with the other person and see what their reaction is. Yeah. I mean, again, even a healthy person will be like, "Oh man, I was hoping we could have had another drink or so," but that's fine. If the other person reacts to your simply communicated and reasonable boundary with
Mhm.
guilt tripping you, with anger, with anything negative that really indicates that I guess, like, it doesn't matter everything they've done for you the last few months, anything like that, especially if it becomes a pattern, then even with the euphoria of love bombing, you have the right to walk away and probably should. Again, it's rarely any one instance necessarily.
Mm,
Even healthy relationships have their speed bumps.
of
It's
course.
how you navigate it, and if it becomes a pattern, that matters more.
Mm. It's quite a tricky one, really, to be
It
honest.
is. It is. And yeah, I mean, people say, "Oh,
It's like a
healthy."
minefield.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, again, I really think that because the whole fear of love bombing is a real one for survivors. But I also believe that just, simple, healthy boundaries is a quite easy way to get an idea. Again, it's not a test, it's not a trap. It's just, seeing your dynamic, their reactions to, not just their needs and wants and your mutual ones in the relationship, but also respecting yours as well as an individual. That's very important, especially in the start of establishing any healthy relationship that will be ongoing.
Okay, so when we talk about these healthy boundaries,
Yeah.
what does that look like? You
Okay.
know, a typical relationship that if you've got the clients and you say, look, you've got to have these healthy boundaries, what does it physically look like? What do you say to your clients to say, look, say A, B, and C, and depending
Mhm.
on what comes back, be very cautious. Like, just give us a practical and example.
Okay. So, gotta hydrate. Are you from the UK originally, by the way?
Am I what?
Are you from the UK originally, by the way?
Yeah,
What part?
I'm in Europe at the moment.
Oh, well, yeah, you look very alpine. It's beautiful. I'm American, but based in Edinburgh. But like, yeah. Anyway, a little bit of an addiction to this stuff. Can't get enough of it. So yeah. So okay. So as I mentioned earlier, just one example, and I do have a video on this on our channels also that people can view, and we
Mhm.
will be expanding on the topic. One example is, let's say you're out with a friend, work colleagues, potential, a date, and yeah, they want you to stay out longer, but again, in all sincerity, I'm sorry, but like, I really need to head out by 8 o'clock tonight. Again, very simple, reasonable boundary, right? And again, they might express disappointment that they wanted to spend more time with you, but again, they're not going to respond by making you feel guilty, selfish, or that, you use them somehow. Another boundary, for example, is, I'm not really that comfortable discussing politics at the dinner table, but I mean, let's be real these days, whew, that is a minefield. But, again, for example, navigating stressful family holidays, that can be a good one if you just can't get out of going to them, for example. So another one is maybe with a toxic boss. Because we discussed, for example, gray rocking versus yellow rocking. And I highly recommend yellow rocking because if you do gray rocking at work, you might get, you're not a team player, but yellow rocking, you can still finesse your interactions with a toxic boss and coworkers without giving them fuel, but also being engaged as an employee. So yeah, so that's something that we offer. But another example, you have a boss that, let's say 2 months ago gave you a promotion, right? You're pumping your fists in the air in the car, you're still doing great work. And you get pulled in for this meeting that has a lot of word salad about targets that all of a sudden the goalposts are moved, and you're kind of left bewildered, knowing that you are doing a pretty good job with the promotion you have. So with the boundary, you thank them for bringing this to your attention, and you tell them something like, this is really important to me. So give me a few days to give it some meaningful thought, and then I'll circle back to you on email, because that way it's a sincere answer that you value the feedback and want to do better, but then you also have it in email and writing in case things end up getting worse with the boss. So that, again, so so we work, Fahim and I, and me as the one who does the one-on-one counseling sessions. When we mean custom, because, for example, the gray rocking course is 4 sessions, $600 US, which is not a small amount of money. We offer payment plans. When we say custom, we mean custom. For example, the 4th session involves the first half hour of role playing based on what they told me about their situation, that I am the toxic person and they reply as they're supposed to, because you can't yellow rock family members the same way that you can your boss. So you can look up, a list online of 20 yellow rock phrases to use, but are they really going to apply to your particular circumstances effectively, right? So yeah, so those are a few examples of, again, just healthy, reasonable, well-expressed boundaries that can be, I don't want to say used or deployed, but that can be factored into a relationship early on. That again are protective but not overly complicated, for somebody to gauge, what kind of person they're interacting with, and if this is a healthy relationship dynamic or may devolve into one that won't be.
Interesting. And you've gone through this toxic relationship yourself. You had to go through that yourself. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say too much at the moment, but I will say that, again, I'll be 47 next month. And it's kind of amusing that since I began doing this work, about half a dozen people have sort of been in touch thinking that it's about them, which is amusing because it's like the Carly Simon song, "You're So Vain, You Probably Think the Song Is About You." So I'm doing work related to NPD, and like numerous people kind of assuming it's all about them, which in some ways is actually rather narcissistic. But I do go over how any one of us can have a narcissistic trait or two. For example, when I used to do my cabaret show, I used to love when people, would tell me that I sounded and, looked great and, had a great outfit. But again, fundamentally, for cluster B and NPD, especially patterns, especially of lack of empathy or feigning it, of blame shifting, and just a complete inability to take accountability.
Uh-huh.
If somebody with MPD does take accountability, it's often very small and qualified. It's like, yeah, but I had a bad day at work, or, and they're doing it to potentially get them off the hook for something bigger later on. So those two things, just lack of empathy, just constant blame shifting and an ability to take accountability. So again, there are a few boxes to tick. And again, we can all be self-centered at times. We all have our own things to go through. But again, patterns. Because, as people with ADHD, I'm sure you and I probably relate to being really frustrated by, oh, well, everybody forgets things and everybody gets distracted. And it's like,
Mhm.
that's not what this is. Again, just a series of different behaviors and symptoms that are in patterns with any situation that you're dealing with relating to the mind.
Yeah, that is the thing. And with your ADHD, how are you coping at the moment? When did you first find out you had ADHD yourself? So let's talk about that. I
Well,
mean,
let's talk about that a little bit.
shows about
Yeah.
ADHD, right?
Yeah. So I've had a handful of romantic relationships that I'm, in hindsight, pretty sure that there was some cluster B elements going on. It was very toxic. There's one boss that I had at one point that I'm almost completely certain also had it, and one friendship for several years that just drained the life out of me. That I'm pretty sure also. So again, we don't just go over romantic relationships. It happens in all aspects. Fahim, his father. So yeah. So I was one of those kids, again, I was born in 1978. So growing up in the 80s, at that point, growing up in central New Jersey, it was thought back then that
Uh-huh.
mostly or only boys had ADHD, if it was even recognized at all,
Yeah,
right?
it's too. Mm.
Yeah. So we fast forward to the 90s, 1992, I start high school. It's actually, an exciting time to be a teenager. Like, the whole grunge thing is happening, and, the Berlin Wall fell, that better world that we thought that's kind of a dumpster fire now did seem possible. And I was fortunate enough to have gone to high school in an upper middle class suburb, but it was also very ethnically, racially, religiously mixed. Like, so I was very lucky in that respect. And academically, it was good. But let's just say that I was raw dogging it academically, because if you're not medicated, you develop a lot of coping mechanisms to
Mm.
overcome the ADHD, to fill in those gaps, right?
Of
So
course.
I was that kid who got the report card. It's like, yeah, hang on a second, let me just draw the blinds because the sun is out in Scotland, which is nice normally, but not right in my eyes. So just give me a moment to draw the curtains. Sorry about that. Hello, she's back. I was like, All right. So, so I was that kid who got the report cards, which a lot of ADHD, people who got diagnosed at an older age can relate to. Very intelligent, but needs to apply herself more, and things like that. So, but I ended up doing well enough again in high school that I ended up being admitted to a number of, really good schools, not just Johns Hopkins, but, several other ones. And I chose Hopkins, which, is a small school. I think it has about like 3,000 people, but I think it's like ranked like number 6, like higher
Mhm.
than some Ivies. It's one of those schools like Stanford where it's not an Ivy League, but, still, yeah. So, I was really proud of myself for having achieved that. And actually, 5 friends that I went to school with that grew up with were also in my graduating class, which is kind of nice. So, but yeah, I struggled at university also because, it wasn't that I couldn't handle the material. That wasn't it. Um, my main professor, Franklin Knight, who's
Uh-huh.
Jamaican from Negril, he's still alive. I love him. He really believed in me. And, he put me as an undergrad in, a few graduate seminars. When I was in
Mhm.
high school, I took graduate level classes at Harvard Summer School, and this is not again to brag about my credentials. It's that I've always loved learning. And even with my ADHD, I managed to overcome barriers to, being able to access it. And
Uh-huh.
again, continuously trying to use it, not for me to show off, but also to also give back. So I graduated from Hopkins, and but it was hard. It was hard. Not just because it's an exit in school, but just a lot of the coping mechanisms that I developed in high school weren't quite working there. So I moved to New York City right before 9/11. Graduated class of 2001. Took me 5 years to get my degree, but I got it. And yeah, and then spent a couple of years a bit adrift. Lived in New Orleans for 2 years pre-Katrina, and then I moved back to New York in 2004. And I read an article on a flight about ADHD, and I think it was like Fast Company or something, not related to medicine at all.
Okay.
But I started crying on the plane because I thought, oh my God, this is me. And I had a therapist in New York City at that point.
Okay.
And I was very fortunate that I had the assessment done, and yeah, he agreed, and I was medicated, and it changed my life. It changed my life.
Wow.
It changed my life. I mean, again, things weren't perfect, of course, but yeah, focus. Although hyper focus can also be, a secret ADHD superpower at times, but my focus and executive function just really got up to par. I wasn't fumbling around as much with handwritten to-do lists, and like all these like what was it, like the little pilot schedulers, like in the early 2000s, remember? Yeah, like again, all these like things, like it's like, come on, help me get it together. So yeah, so I started my own boutique I guess evening events firm. Like, for example, I lived in downtown New York City and just met a lot of people. So oh, you wanted that reservation at Le Bernardin and a night out afterwards, a table at Bungalow 8? I can do that for you. So yeah. So again, primarily everything that I've done has been about connecting with people, but in an authentic way. Like, for me and Fahim, authenticity isn't just a buzzword, because especially when you're dealing with NPD and, gaslighting, that kind of thing, the last thing that people that come to us want is just more bullshit. They want authenticity.
Right. So you decided to do the medication because things became quite awkward, quite difficult, etc. So what is that?
Well, I didn't really fully know what I was dealing with again, because remember, 80s and 90s, it just really wasn't quote unquote a thing. And if it was thought to be mostly boys. And I was academically accomplished. So, why would I have it? Right. But again, as we've seen just even in the last 2 decades, those things don't really matter. We've heard a lot of stories from people with ADHD who are diagnosed as adults, who are also women, who also raw dogged it academically, for lack of a better term. So yeah, so we do know a lot more now, which I do believe correlates to everybody has ADHD now. It's like, no, we're just more aware of the comorbidities and the realities of it and how it presents or it doesn't present, depending on individual differences. So, yeah. I mean, including cultural also, for example, a friend of mine in grad school who's from Delhi originally, I helped her guide her to a private assessment. And, her family isn't really on board with the whole ADHD thing, but she got treated and medicated a few years ago. So again, so many factors to consider, not just how you are doing, but what kind of environment are you in? What support system do you have? What do you have access to in terms of assessments, medication? For example, I live in Scotland. I'm on Elvans currently, 40 milligrams a day. Fantastic medication. If I were in America, uninsured, it would be, I think, $400 a month to get it. And even with insurance, a not small copay, NHS Scotland, thank goodness, free. So I'm very lucky in that respect. And also that my diagnosis just transferred seamlessly when I moved to the UK 10 years ago, which I'm also grateful for.
All right, let's talk about more in depth about ADHD in general. I've been had a discussion actually the last 24 hours because someone said, for you to have ADHD, something is going to be different within your brain, and it's going to
Yeah.
show in a scan. But the thing is, I said, okay,
Mm-hmm.
if the situation is that the majority of us have had this test, and we have ADHD, but majority of us haven't had a brain scan.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's one of those things where
What's
there's
to
no
say
brain,
it's
blood
due to
test or
something
whatever.
else? We've just got certain traits of ADHD.
Yes.
It doesn't prove that we have this because we've had it at birth, and that's why we've got ADHD. What's your thoughts on that?
Oh God. Okay. Well, again, there are different types of ADHD, first of all, as we know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now the brain scanning I'm not as familiar with. Definitely with things like NPD, like for example, brain scans on both cluster B and abuse survivors that show altered parts of the brain, like the amygdala, for example, in survivors. I mean, like NPD abuse literally gives you a form of brain damage. I mean, it does.
Uh-huh.
And for people with cluster B, when they're shown images of people in distress, parts of their brain that show empathy just don't really do anything. Now for ADHD, I'll be perfectly honest. In terms of the brain imaging, I'm not completely sure to what degree that applies. I did a lot of work with it, especially, based on my my master's in general and special ed, of course, not just as somebody who has them, working with a lot of kids with ADHD. But as of recently, admittedly, I have not seen much in regards to peer-reviewed studies or even general information on the brain imaging scans. That being said, for the majority of anything relating to the mind, there's no blood tests. Obviously, some issues are more flagrant than others. But for example, sometimes I've heard numerous instances, there are comorbidities, and I've heard numerous instances of people with ADHD initially when they were seeking help, being incorrectly diagnosed with borderline personality disorder or bipolar, until they found the right fit. And just one horror story about a former patient that I had who was put on antipsychotics for ADHD that really did a number on them. So again, there are some, I guess, comorbidities, especially with, I guess, the excitement that some of us with ADHD, myself especially, maybe can seem a bit quote unquote manic, but we also have our introverted moments too, and we need to recharge our social batteries and get our spoons back also. So with the brain imaging, I still think we're very much at the pattern recognition and honest self-reflection and assessment stage of it. Again, despite the credentials that I have, I hardly claim to know everything. I love to keep learning and evolving, not just as a person, but as a clinician. So that is something that actually, now that you brought it up, is something that I'm definitely more interested in seeing what direction that goes, for sure.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. I mean, like I said, I like a good conversation, but I like to use a bit of common sense, because I think to myself, with so much that's happened in the last few years, be it medication we've taken, processed food with all the toxins in the food, etc.
Microplastics.
We could go on.
We have a spoon in our brain. Did you read that?
Exactly.
Yeah, like adults now have the equivalent of a plastic spoon and microplastics in their brain, and I talked about that with a few friends, not just in the field and out, but it's just mind-boggling. Like one of my closest friends who I went to undergrad with, she has a PhD in neuroscience from Hopkins also. Salt of the earth, but yeah, I mean that is wild. Things like that, yeah. Also, I don't think enough time has passed, and I don't have any studies to back this up. This is just, I freely admit when something is just a matter of opinion, but based on something that it seems to me that since COVID restrictions lifted, there's a segment of the population that quite hasn't really relearned how to be out in the wild again, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like,
I agree.
More, not flagrantly antisocial behavior, but like, we just don't know how to relate to each other the same anymore. And especially you being from me living in the UK, I mean, you can just go like to the post office or, your friendly local offie, and there's always some sign do not abuse our staff, verbally. And it's like, oh,
Hmm.
geez, like, is it that bad that, like, pretty much every business, no matter what they do at dry cleaners or whatever, it's like, don't abuse our staff. I mean,
Totally.
personally, I haven't seen it happen, witness it, but, clearly if like it's that out there, it's an issue.
No,
So
exactly. I
again,
mean,
just an educated
COVID really
opinion
hit
based on
us all. Absolutely.
observations. But I think COVID bubbles and just flat out isolation really did a number on some people that they just, and also the physical aspects of, long COVID too.
Yeah.
It really had an impact that I don't think we're dealing with globally effectively, even in the more developed countries like the UK and even the
Yeah, yeah.
continent in
Yeah,
Europe.
no, no, you're totally right. And this is exactly why when I had that conversation the last 24 hours, I says, there's a lot of people being diagnosed with ADHD, but I believe we can have, especially when you're using a tick list, as you said, no blood test, no scans. It just comes down to specific tick lists and also the experience of the practitioner with people. And so
Yeah,
it comes down to, it could be any number of things that have been going from the last few years. So it may not be
yeah,
something that you had at birth. It could have
yeah,
been
yeah,
something that you had taken the last 10 years or whatever
yeah.
the case may be. And this is why I'm very cautious when people say, when you've got ADHD, you had to be born with it. Not really.
Yeah, yeah. Again, yeah, it's very similar to autism and just people on the spectrum, and that yes, we're aware of it. And again, the spectrum is massive. I've worked with children mostly on every end and in between who are very high functioning to
Mm,
just fully nonverbal, for example. Both in my undergrad and when I was teaching in New York City for a while. And also, friends and people in my personal life too, just all kinds of neurospicy folks. But the thing is also that, for a lot of us, and it's not that we need to make excuses or be victims.
mhm,
That's not it. These are
mhm.
realities that, it's like, oh, well, back in my day, it's like, oh, no, back in your day, people got blind drunk to cope with these things that we're diagnosing and like being able to treat in a healthy manner now. Come on. So just a personal example. Yeah, I have
Mhm.
ADHD, but also anxious attachment disorder that I've been working on
Mm,
for years. So those can overlap a little bit, especially when it comes to like, the RSD, the rejection sensitivity dysphoria, right?
interesting. Okay,
But
hold on a
again,
second.
like,
Let's hold on.
I was a
Let's track
singer
back.
and
Hold on. Let's track
I'm
back
still
on
getting
that.
booked actually.
Hold
Oh,
on. Let's track down back on the
yeah.
anxiety disorder. That's quite a difficult one. I
No,
know a lot of people that.
not so much anxiety disorder, but anxious attachment, which is more of the relationship interplay.
Okay, let's
Yeah.
talk about that. Give us a bit of information on that.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, there are a few types of attachment disorders which can again sometimes overlap with some minor NPD and cluster B traits. For example, there avoidant, especially attachment disorder,
Hmm.
can
Hmm.
sometimes be mistaken for that. Anxious attachment means that you have a hard time, feeling secure in any relationship. Again, not just romantic, friendships, family bonds, work settings. And when you combine that again with the rejection sensitive dysphoria that often comes with ADHD, yeah, it can really, make for quite a stew. But again, these are things that I've been aware of and working on for years now, luckily, so even though it's been painful at times, the gift of having that clarity and a good support system and the privilege of, access to decent medical care, of course, helps a lot. So,
Hmm.
for example, as I mentioned, for 2 years I worked as a singer and cabaret
Hmm.
producer and hostess. And you get rejection. That's just showbiz, right? You're not going to be everybody's flavor, right? I mean, there's a quote that I love by Dita Von Teese that pretty much goes. I'm going to paraphrase it. You can be the ripest and juiciest peach in the orchard, but there's always going to be someone who just doesn't like peaches. So, I've learned through, therapy, including, CBT, which helps with ADHD and attachment disorders, by the way, in my case.
Hmm.
That, the anxious attachment and the RSD has come down much more than from when I was like a teenager, for example. I mean, things still sting. I'm not a stoic. I'm not numb, but at the
Hmm.
same time, you're able to process it overall in a much more healthy way. Like if a particular, club doesn't want to hire me for their Friday bite slot, okay, well, I'm not for them. But like, next month, even though I'm still doing, like the therapy stuff and whatnot, I got booked to do an hour-long headliner at the Crest Fringe Festival in Croatia. I just
Hmm.
applied, like a 3-song slot, this will be fun. It's like, oh, would you like an hour-long slot? And I said, yes, thank you. Wow. Okay. So, things like that, just putting yourself out there and, again, yeah, the RSD and the anxious attachment can really make, for a mix where it a lot feels like it can hurt a lot more than it should.
Mm. And that must be really difficult for you, especially when you're doing the video with the
Well, not
anxiety.
not not as
How
much
did you
again,
handle
because
that?
again, having that gift of clarity for years now and working on it has
Uh-huh.
helped a lot.
Okay.
Again, some things are going to resonate with some people more. Um, and that's kind of the way it is. Fahim, my partner, not only is a coach, but he's also good with the digital marketing part.
Hmm.
So yeah, so I don't necessarily take a lot personally. I mean, I'm open to constructive feedback, of course, and
Uh-huh.
having dialogues. Like for example, it's like, maybe like, raise your chin a bit more, and it's like, all right, and maybe slow down on certain clinical terms to make sure that viewers really understand them. All right, fair enough, right? So yeah, again, yeah, I still have my bad days. Things still stink sometimes. I'm not a robot. But again, having the access to what I've had, the privileges that I've had, has made it much better compared to, for example, when I was a teenager and in my early 20s. Now as especially like, my 30s and now mid 40s. So yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Can I just ask you also, is what made you want to help people and be there for people to help them through the situation of narcissism and all of that? What made that decision to go in that direction?
Um, I think that it just came from the disorder itself being so poorly understood
Uh-huh.
and survivors themselves being so poorly understood. I mean, for example, as I mentioned earlier, to circle back, it's thought between 1 to 5% of the
Mm-hmm.
population has NPD. Now, 1% of anything statistically usually isn't significant, right? But there are 8 billion people on Earth. Let's say 3% of the population has NPD. That's
Mm-hmm.
240 million people. 3% of the population, not that small anymore, right? So and again, not just NPD, but also just working on toxic behavior dynamics, healing from them, protecting yourself, building and nurturing healthy relationships. But yeah, fundamentally, like, if you go on, like survivor forums, whether they've been out of the relationship, whether, again, parents, partner, etc., whether it's just dawning on them or for years, it's easy to think that they're
Uh-huh.
using very hyperbolic language and being drama queens. I mean, you will see terms like soul destroying. I don't even know who I am anymore. My brain was thrown into a blender. And I mean, and people will say to you, even close friends that you reach out to sometimes, all right, everybody goes through a hard breakup. I get it, but calm down, but it's one of those things that, as Fahim and I have talked about, as fellow survivors, not just, with credentials,
Uh-huh.
it's not a fun club to be in, and if you know, you know. So I think that's fostered more trust in us, the authenticity, again, not just the credentials, but yeah, we've been there too. So yeah, fundamentally, yeah. So for me, it was an opportunity to use the experience and knowledge that I had also working with children in both what led to adult disorders, but also children affected by
Okay.
caregivers with again, not just any 1 or 2 degrees.
Okay.
But yeah, so that was it, just like using all this to I guess, just give back. And yes, keep a roof over my head and eat, capitalism. But again, meaningful work.
Yeah, because you're doing something that you have a passion for. So that's
I
great.
really do. I mean, this is like a startup, to be honest. Fahim and I are just getting started. The YouTube channel is monetized but small right now. Yeah. So, but again, we're not out to become moguls. We're not like looking to buy a private jet, with like narcissismexposed.com on it or anything like that. Yeah. Like a sustainable income, of course, but we offer loads of different types of content, from free that's valuable, like on Substack, subscription models, ebooks, and worksheets that are like, $15, $20 each. The one-on-one sessions, yes, are more expensive with me, but it is work, not just the hour
Yeah.
time, but like the preparation. As I
Mm.
said, for example, the co-parenting protocol. Apart from the sessions, if you live in Kerala or in Florida, I'm going to be doing research on what the family courts are like there before I work with you.
Mhm.
So, instead of like, a random coach that charges $4,000 for 8 sessions that she tells everybody the same, co-parenting courts. I mean, no. I mean, when we say custom, like, we mean it.
Mm. And that's really good. Now, if there was one thing you can share with the listeners, that one thing, not three, not two, but that's one bit of gold.
Yeah, well, we'll be here for 3 more hours if I share 3 more. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
exactly. What would you share with them to help them?
Well, so tell me again, one thing that.
To share with the listeners, something that was a bit of gold that could help their lives, enrich it. Just one thing. What would you
One
share with
thing.
them?
Okay. Okay. Um, Trust your gut, trust patterns, but also let yourself be a little bit soft and embrace the joy that life has to offer. Again, don't be that person that builds this crusty, moldy, fort and fortress around their heart. Maybe
Mm.
build a moat around it, you know. Maybe like, build a moat and be more selective about who gets to paddle across it to access you and your heart, because you are a person, well, as in general, all of us, our care, our time, our energy are all finite resources. Our love might not be, but those other things are, and we owe it to ourselves and the people that we love to again, not shut ourselves off completely, but to also choose carefully who gets valuable access to us.
Those are well said words for sure. How can they get hold of you? So if they need your help, how do
Okay,
they get hold?
well, again, you can share the link on Substack,
Mhm.
and also services, etc., are available on narcissismexposed.com. We also do have our YouTube channel, Narcissism Exposed, with shorts and longs with me and Fahim. And there's our TikTok that just started a couple of weeks ago, which is narcissism.exposed. And I'm doing the videos for that so far. We've only been at it for just over 2 weeks on the TikTok, and it's really resonating. So definitely, if folks want to come over, and this is not just about engagement, I welcome your feedback for ideas on videos. And I do often say that, I welcome seeing and reading comments, because your perspective, others' perspective, not just mine, can also prospectively help somebody else on their own healing journey too.
Mm.
Even,
And as you
even when
can
I'm
hear,
talking at a camera and TikTok, it's important to have dialogues fundamentally. Yeah, that is how healthy relationships work. Not just communication, but sometimes hard conversations, but yeah, dialogue.
and I can hear your passion for sure. And listeners, as you can hear, she has a huge passion to help as many people as possible, and a
Well,
huge
I
amount.
wouldn't say as many people, because again, I have to be careful to not overload myself too. And I
Well,
love what
no,
I do. But again, this is not solely about money. If I don't feel that, I have the capacity as an individual myself to take on, like 60 clients a week, it's not going to serve them any good either, right?
of
It's just not.
course,
So
of
yeah.
course.
So yeah. But yeah,
Well,
I
the
mean, again,
listeners,
we are here to help. Again, the free content online, one-to-one, lots of in between at any price points. because we know that toxic relationships sometimes can often leave you not only emotionally, but financially drained too. So we don't want money to be a barrier to getting support in our community.
Well, the listeners will contact you. I'll put the details below as normal.
Oh,
Listeners,
thank
the
you.
information will be down there, and like and subscribe and all those wonderful things. And thank you for coming on the
Oh, thank you
podcast.
for inviting me. I mean, yeah, I when I saw your Substack, you know, again, I thought it was fascinating and, you know, fantastic content. And I definitely hope that this isn't the last time that we work together, because again, you know, there's just so much potential for, I think, you know, lifting the weight off the shoulders of people.
No, for sure. There's no two ways about that. So once again, thank you, thank you, thank you. And listeners, thank you for joining us today, and subscribe and all those wonderful things. And sayonara.
Adios, Eli. We'll speak soon. Have a great afternoon. Bye.
Hold on a minute. I can't stop. My mouse has gone missing. Come back. Come back.
All right. No, I'm still here, but we will see each other again soon. Bye.
Hold on. I stopped. Hold on.
Okay, there we go. Okay, I saw
Hold
that.
on.
Okay.
Done it.
All right.
Found it.
So yeah,
Oh,
again, I know I'm a